Can I continue?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm just gonna share my screen, and like I said, I'll try and I'll try and sync up later so that I can get this in the drive and get some actual feedback going. But in a summary, we're trying to carry forward a lot of the use cases that we have on Cloud Foundry into the Istio and kind of Envoy mesh. So written a bit of an overview here, which I'm probably just going to try and read here, but we're going to try and delegate the logic of various OAuth, OIDC flows into the Istio mesh so that developers can kind of unburden themselves from the language or the framework that they're using. Typically, we've seen people use something like Spring Security to do this, but we think that there might be some value in kind of moving that into the mesh. But the end game would be that all this stuff can be managed at the mesh level as opposed to application. So I'll probably skip the personas a bit, but the one we care the most about is the application developer and kind of freeing up their time to focus more on the business logic of their app. We have a use case here, and this picture here is more or less just what the picture for book info kind of looks like. So I'm kind of skip that if that's okay, and kind of talk about some of the security policies that we've seen app developers have to account for. And if you're familiar with OAuth or OIDC, then some of these should feel pretty similar, or sorry, familiar. But a lot of this stuff is in various states in the Istio community. So for example, ingress level token acquisition. This is about actually having an end user who might be visiting the product page be redirected to an external IDP. Service level authentication is something that is completed, and I think it's done using the JWT auth filter, but this is about validating a token and ensuring it's the integrity of it before it actually gets proxied to the application. Another big one is that delegating a token to downstream services in the mesh. So product page is able to talk to a bunch of services that are not exposed publicly, and we'd like the user's token to be carried forward. I think there's some work that's related in this space already with like AP tokens, and there's another proposal. Another one that we care a lot about is the authorization piece of it, and writing more complex expressions around the claims that are inside a scope. So, I mean, like a lot of people are familiar with like scopes and using those to actually kind of do more fine-grained authorization. Another one we talked about is service-to-service access rules. I think this is also something that's completed, but it's plainly about who can talk to who when you're actually figuring out which traffic to actually support. And all of these things are kind of things we don't want the app developer to necessarily care about when they're actually writing their app code. Some of the stuff they will, but we think that a lot of this stuff can actually be moved into the mesh. So really what we're laying out here is just a bunch of use cases to kind of draw out that full experience of what OAuth and OIDC can give us. And so we took a second to also kind of research in the community what existing work's being done. So for all those use cases, we've kind of written a little bit of a blurb about some related proposals and their state. We're hoping that we can use this to kind of track some of this progress. If you're kind of scanning the rightmost column, you can see it's pretty varied in terms of what work's actually been done. Some of them have been stalled and there hasn't been too much communication around what the progress is, versus some were proposed like 2 weeks ago. So we definitely understand that there's a lot happening right here, but we're kind of hoping that this keeps us all aligned on what that full experience should look like. And then I think we also just spent a quick amount of time thinking about what order we could possibly implement a lot of this stuff. So again, we've definitely completed some of this stuff in the community. And then there's just a couple more things that we'd like to see. And that's roughly kind of what we wanted to share. I think right now our focus, at least in terms of where we might be trying to actually help out, is this proposal that someone by the name Nick Smith from Thales Security proposed. Kind of has to do with that initial browser redirection that users would have to go through. But that's the majority of it. I'm gonna stop sharing and see if there's any questions or feedback from anybody. Yeah. Or if I missed anything, I think Shri or Tian, our product managers, are in here as well.
Can you actually go back to sharing?
Yeah, definitely. Is there a page you wanted to see in there, maybe?
Yeah, the one where you had this one.
Okay.
This last item on service level authorization, fine-grained scope expressions. Can you talk about what that means?
Yeah, I'm just gonna kind of write here, or I'm just gonna like take a little sandbox, a little piece here. I think right now, oh, I have to switch. I think right now, from what we were kind of researching, it's been pretty research heavy in the last week or two to kind of figure out what's happened and what's hasn't. So please correct me if I'm wrong. But I think what we believe is that developers kind of want to write something that's more complex like this. When they're kind of writing whether or not we should let this request through. I think currently the constraints that are available on service role binding don't support this.
So these foo.admin and read and write, these are nominally like permissions or?
Correct. Yeah, they'd be there to support more finer grained authorization. Yeah.
Okay, so we're just talking about like more freedom on how you combine different attributes in order to make a judgment about access control?
Correct. I think a reference framework that exists out in the wild would be kind of like Spring Security, and I think they have something called SPEL, Spring Security Expression Language, or something like that.
Okay.
And I think I kind of based some of my some of this on that. Yeah. But I think right now it provides like a generic way of reaching into the claims of a token, but we'd want something a bit more expressive about specifically the scope claim.
Yeah, so actually, if you use Istio RBAC today, I think you can express any and all condition.
Interesting.
So for foo.admin, I'm wondering, is that an attribute or is a job claim? I'm not sure.
It's a job claim.
It's a job claim.
Yeah, today we actually have a way in which you can define these permissions, so to speak, and then they're just like named roles, like for what it's worth, and they can be mapped back to, like, say, existing groups in an Active Directory to make that easier. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much how we have things set up today. But to Akash's point, I think we are looking at taking things further, because instead of just like going by like very simple authorization rules, like if we had to define something complex, how do we do that? On the use cases themselves, I think like the most important use case for us is the token acquisition, right? Like, and what persona are we talking about there? Like, is it an end user trying to access an application running within the mesh versus like application sitting outside the mesh trying to interact with an API with the mesh? So those are some use cases that we have. But I think where we have not necessarily formed an opinion is when it comes to within the mesh, like interactions. Should we do this with something like OAuth OpenID Connect, or it can be some like a jot, but not necessarily OAuth interactions. I think that's where it's not clear to us. And also, when it comes to, like if we want to use the token to call an service externally, so if you have an app running within the mesh, it needs to call something outside the mesh. So that's an egress call. So that's further downstream, like in terms of priority. But
Yeah.
how do you take the token that was potentially acquired on the edge, pass it all the way on the outbound, where you still need to talk standards? It could be like that the outbound service is SOA and it like expects like a certain header, or it is SAML and it is expecting a SAML assertion. It could be anything, but that's the
Yeah.
world
So
that we are operating in.
yeah, Sri, actually, you brought up a good point. Actually, there is one effort I want you to. I was actually plan to share a doc about the group support we are planning to add. So currently, the basic group support which we are already working on is that in the just token you can have multiple group claims, and if you define in the ABAC binding, if you say assign to admin group, and if the just claim has admin as one of the group claim, it will be so authorization check will pass. There is another type of group support which currently we are considering adding is to support distributed claim. So basically, yeah, maybe let me just share the doc.
Sharing.
It's I haven't.
But you're not presenting. You can send me the doc. I can present.
Oh, okay. I just want to share part of the screen because it's not fully finalized. Yeah.
You have Zoom.
Yes.
You can use Zoom to share it.
Okay. So let me just describe the idea first. Then I'll share the doc. Put the doc in the community drive. So basically, in the claim, you can specify claim name, which is called groups, and then you can specify where you can retrieve the group membership. And for that, you can specify the endpoint, which is a URL pointing to an external endpoint. It can be Active Directory or any database.
So,
you are storing.
Can I make sure that I'm understanding this correctly? You're saying that in the JOT, there'll be a claim that
Yes.
is sort of an indirection, like a pointer to some other data source, and said, like,
Right.
this is the authoritative endpoint for what groups, the thing that JOT is about is at.
Yes.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. So in the URL, you can actually code the user's ID. Like, for example, it can be example.com/user, and the user ID is 12345 /groups. So with that URL, you can fetch the group membership for this user 12345.
Isn't there a standard already in OpenID Connect
It
to do
is.
that? So we
Yes,
are
it's a standard.
stick with standards like OpenID Connect user info, for example. You can go get that information, because if
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, it is a standard. It's actually it's called a distributed claim in OIDC.
Okay, awesome.
And that's the ongoing work we are currently trying to add. So Sri, does that support the use case you had in mind? I think you just mentioned retrieve the group membership from endpoint, right?
Yes, it definitely helps us, because we do have customers today who are relying on external groups as a means of performing authorization decisions within a web application or a downstream microservice. So that definitely is in line. I think we are good with that. I think to bring it back to Akash, like what Akash presented with respect to use cases, I think for us right now the kind of MVP we are looking for is, hey, how much can Istio handle token acquisition for different use cases, right? So there is the end user token acquisition, and then like passing that token downstream to the API. Probably within the mesh, so that like the claims can be used in that downstream decision making. So could you like shed some light on what is your thought process there? Because the token relay and token acquisition are top of our like mind in terms of how we would like to roll this out to our customers, because those are the kind of problems we are solving today, is token acquisition and token relay. And since it is all JOT, there is Spring security, and there are ways to enforce, like first of all validate the token and enforce based on what the claims in the token, a certain authorization decision. So um, how can we like make progress on those two aspects, right? Like the acquisition and the relay aspect, or even in relay there is some amount of exchange involved, and I think that's what the AP token feature that plan on working on is about. So could you shed some light on the kind of use cases you're thinking about there, because that's exactly where we would like to invest in as well.
So when you are talking about token acquisition, I want to make sure I understand. We're talking about how, when an end user accesses a web service with their browser, how do you sort of redirect the browser and manage that OAuth workflow such that the end user obtains the token from their identity provider, such that they can then provide it to Istio, or is there something else? Like, are we talking about how does Istio get the token from the end user? What specifically do we mean when we say token acquisition?
By token acquisition, I mean Istio is responsible for doing the redirects to the identity provider or the STS to get a token that is needed by the application.
Okay.
So,
you mentioned the token acquisition. So there is some, just the FYI, so we just started the effort in our team, the AP token, that is after you get the JOT token, we do the token exchange. So right now we are defining the interface. So hopefully in the next community meeting, we will bring that the token exchange interface to give the community review. And we can see how we can collaborate on the acquisition and token exchange.
Okay.
From my understanding, the AP token doesn't really deal with any acquisition at all. It's about you've already acquired the token.
Yes.
Right.
So talking about the token, it will exchange to some short life.
Yeah, I think token acquisition, Nick's proposal talk about how to acquire a token through the OIDC filter, right? Yeah. And the AP token is also focusing on token exchange. So basically, we want to get a short-lived token that can be only used inside the mesh.
Right.
And
we've actually split out both of our use cases based upon the two different flows, one for acquisition and one for exchange, because we realized that on the ingress boundary, when you're entering the mesh, there could be both cases happening. So if I'm building a UI application within the service mesh, then I may want to have Istio help me do the acquisition as per Nick Smith's. But at the same time, on an inbound to the mesh, I may have an API exposed that will be doing more of a token exchange. So, these are kind of the cases where we're trying to actually say there are actually distinct flows at play here, which is why we've kind of split those out in our document.
Actually, the AP token exchange that we are talking about, is it based on the RFC out there? Because there is some RFC for token exchange. Is that what we are talking about, or is it JOT and just like some way of like creating this flow wherein you have a token server which just mints short-lived tokens? So could you elaborate on this token exchange?
We want to have a well-formatted token I think in the AP token proposal, we actually have a proposed format, how this AP token should look like. It will include all the claims of the original token. And also we make sure that it can only be used inside the mesh. So it prevents the token being reused by some malicious user from outside the mesh. And also it should be short-lived.
So we can control the lifetime of the token.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Have you ever reviewed the AP token proposal?
Yeah.
I think
I haven't, so that's my bad. I'm gonna do that. I think I'll definitely review and provide feedback. One thing that is jumping out to me right now is we have customer use cases in which not necessarily like when you think about microservices themselves, they can have multiple consumers. They could have consumers which sit within the mesh, and they could have consumers which are outside the mesh. So if you go with something like AP token format, which makes sense only within the mesh, but you have consumers sitting outside which may not be able to get an AP token, I think you still need to probably solve for that use case as well, because the external consumer will only understand standards. Whereas if it is a completely internal microservice, absolutely lightweight, performance oriented, like we want to do that. But like just recently, we were talking to a customer, and they had a service like internal, not necessarily an internal microservice, because they wanted a third party to connect to it, but also an internal app to connect to it. So those were like the two consumers. So I'll probably give that feedback within the doc, but I think that's something that we need to consider.
Yeah, and I think this is where we have had our engineers as well take a look at the APO token document, and we do realize within the mesh, it provides a lot of capabilities, and that's where we're looking right now mainly at the boundary of the mesh. For exchange to happen, you have to have a way to authenticate or at least validate that external token that you're getting is something that you are willing to trust, and that's kind of the mechanism we're saying. It works well for when you have to have an API endpoint that someone from outside the mesh is calling, and Nix, token acquisition falls more into the UI flow where someone outside the mesh is trying to access a UI on the mesh, where they may not have had a way to get a token originally. Having those two distinct use cases kind of looks at then across the customer's application base, kind of what would be helpful for Istio to be able to provide as capabilities.
Yeah, okay. Can you just review the AP token doc and add your comments in that doc?
Yeah. I'll do that. Yeah, I think so. So I'm sorry, I keep coming back to acquisition, but like, how do we move that forward? So we still have, I think some design decisions to be made on where does acquisition happen? Does it happen centrally versus in a distributed manner? Like each sidecar is responsible for acquiring the token for the app or API that it is fronting. I think that's where we would like to understand what is your thought process there. Like, are you thinking about like token acquisition, like architecturally, like where does it make sense to insert?
I think the current architecture actually makes sense doing the token acquisition at the gateway level, because token acquisition it's a pretty complicated flow. It will actually have several redirections. So I don't think we want to put it on individual sidecar.
Okay.
So so whatever I think Nick proposed actually makes sense to me.
Okay. Yeah, I think the only downside that I can see there is if you make it a central thing, then each app may have a different profile for the kind of token that it needs, like say scopes in the token, right? So that becomes like a central management then, because depending on the route that you're accessing, you have to apply a specific OAuth or OpenID Connect client profile.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
last I checked on that doc, I don't think we had any specific proposals for what does the configuration of this look like from the end user? Where is it implemented? I thought that most of what we have so far is kind of nuts and bolts of like
Everyone
how
else
do
has
we
left the call. Everyone else has left the call. Goodbye.
Oh, wow.
I haven't left the call.
What?
I don't think like, last I checked, the proposal was very focused on the kind of nuts and bolts of like, what are the filters we need in Envoy? How does the flow actually work? What are those components? And obviously we do need that, but I think, you know, in terms of answering those design decisions, I think it probably the next step is to actually put something on the table in terms of like
A proposal for that, right?
what should this look like? How should users configure this thing? You know, how should they tell Istio that they want this flow to happen on this URL, and things like that?
Yeah.
It'd be really good if someone who's knowledgeable about the Istio layers could jump in and help with that, actually. Because whilst I've been down in the nuts and bolts of Envoy, that's fine. But actually getting something which is workable at the Istio layer would be good. And if someone has time to help me with that, that'd be even better.
Yeah, definitely. The configuration part, I think we need more thought on that. Yeah, we actually have some. We plan to look into the ingress part, how to configure the authentication rules on ingress.
Okay. So that
So-
becomes part of that bigger epic.
Yeah. I think the end user configuration, like how to acquire token, this should be part of the ingress authentication policy.
Is there something going already? Like, as in, you're thinking about like certain use cases. Is there a proposal we should be looking at, or for end user authn?
Currently, we don't have the proposal to share, but
So probably that's something that
work in progress.
we work on then. Yeah.
Or we can collaborate on that. Yeah, if you
Sure.
have more time.
That'd be great.
Just curious, Apogee has been involved in solving like similar problems, and I read or heard that, you know, they want to move a lot of things like into Istio. Are they at all involved in this, or they are very much like at the perimeter, everything flows through them? And
I think we plan to talk to Apogee folks, but we haven't spent too much time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think the action items I'm seeing at least is, you know, we at least I'm going to take a look at the AP token and try to see if we are missing some use cases that we need to think about. But on the token acquisition front, like to Nick's point, right? Can we pair with someone on the Istio core team to work through this?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, maybe we can you can send us an email and
Sure.
we can talk with.
What about why we need a whole Istio team? I think this.
Just someone like.
So you are just asking for a point of contact, right?
Yeah, just like one.
Yeah, you can just send an email to me. You know my email, right?
Lemon, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Liming1@google.com.
Okay.
The full name.
I'll leave this in the meeting log in the agenda so you can find it.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah, I know Lemon. Yeah, I've seen your videos. Okay.
Could we also could we get some help moving that document into the security working group drive? I also heard like a couple related proposals while we were kind of discussing this stuff, and I feel like we can kind of just link that into there as well, because we're really just trying to get that whole picture in mind for all this OAuth OIDC stuff.
Or replacements thereof.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, do we need to grant permission, or can one of us move the document into the Istio drive?
I think if you're in the Istio community, you should be able to move it too.
Yeah. If you join Istio dev or some mailing list, I think.
Or you can just send us a doc. We can just help you merge.
I see.
I think you just need to join the. You just need to join the group, the Google group, Istio dev or Istio.
I am in that one. I do have access to read all the documents. I just unfortunately can't actually place documents in the drive.
Okay. If possible, maybe you can send the doc to us, and we'll share it. We'll send it to the community, because ownership will actually eventually will transfer to the Istio community.
Exactly.
So no matter who send it, who put it to the community drive.
Awesome.
Okay. You can send it to me or me. We can help you put it in the drive, team drive.
Thank you.
Okay. So do we have anything else to talk? If not, thank you guys. See you next time.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
All right, bye.